His hand grabbed her shoulder. 3 seconds later, Commander Derek Holloway was face down in the dirt, gasping for air he couldn't find. 40 Navy SEALs stood frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The 25-year-old woman they had dismissed as a contractor, the one they joked couldn't handle real pressure, stood over their commanding officer with the calm of someone who had killed more men than most of them had ever met. She dropped a classified folder beside his broken pride. "You just assaulted a federal auditor, Commander, during an investigation into why your training program has been getting operators killed." Target acquired. Biggest mistake realized. From which city are you watching? Drop your location below. Subscribe if you believe real strength never announces itself. This story proves it. The first rifle shot cracked across the range at 0547, cutting through the Virginia Beach morning like a blade through silence. Kira Thorne chambered her second round before the brass casing hit concrete. Her breathing stayed flat. Her heart rate held at 52 beats per minute. She had learned years ago that excitement was a liability, that the body's natural responses to stress could turn a perfect shot into a miss measured in inches that translated to lives. She fired again. The operator 3 positions to her left glanced over, then quickly looked away. She caught it anyway. She always caught it. The small tells that revealed what people were thinking before they knew they were thinking it. "Damn," someone muttered behind her. "Did you see that grouping?" She didn't react, didn't acknowledge, just reloaded with the mechanical precision of someone who had done this 10,000 times under conditions these men couldn't imagine. Senior Chief Marcus Webb stood in the observation tower, binoculars pressed to his eyes. 23 years in naval special warfare. Trained over 2,000 operators. Watched men break under pressure, and watched other men discover they were made of something harder than steel. He knew what good looked like. What he was watching through those binoculars was something else entirely. "Who is she?" he asked the instructor standing beside him. Lieutenant Commander Paulson checked his tablet. "Contractor. Badge says Thorne K. cleared for observation and participation in advanced drills." "Observation and participation," Webb repeated slowly. "That woman isn't observing anything. She's evaluating everything." "Sir." Webb lowered the binoculars. "Look at her eyes. Watch how she scans between shots. She's not focused on her own performance. She's cataloging everyone else's." Paulson squinted toward the firing line. "You think she's some kind of inspector?" "I think her file is going to tell us absolutely nothing, and I think that tells us everything." Down on the range, Kira transitioned from standing to kneeling position. The movement was fluid, rehearsed through years of muscle memory, until her body knew what to do before her conscious mind finished processing the command. Petty Officer Ryan Chen was positioned 2 lanes away. 28 years old, 6 years with the team's 3 deployments. He considered himself an excellent shot. Most of the men here did. He had just watched a 25-year-old woman put 5 rounds through the same hole at 400 meters. When the drill instructor called for a break, Chen found himself walking toward her. He told himself it was professional curiosity, that he wanted to understand her technique, that there was nothing strange about approaching a contractor who shot better than anyone he'd ever seen. "That was impressive work," he said. She didn't look up from her rifle. "Thank you." "Where'd you train?" "Various places." Chen waited for elaboration. It didn't come. The silence stretched between them, and he became aware that she wasn't being rude. She was simply done with the conversation before it started. "You contract for the Navy often," he tried. "When needed?" 3 words, flat and polite, and utterly devoid of information. He had interrogated enemy combatants who gave up more than this woman offered in casual conversation. "I'm Chen," he said. "Ryan Chen." Now she did look up. Her eyes met his for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to acknowledge him as a person, short enough to make clear she had no interest in extending the interaction. Kira. Just the first name. No last name offered, even though he'd given both of his. No unit affiliation, no context, nothing to hang a follow-up question on. She returned to cleaning her rifle with movements so practiced they seemed almost unconscious. Chen stood there for another moment, feeling dismissed without ever being explicitly told to leave. Finally, he nodded and walked back toward his team. "What's her deal?" Petty Officer Morrison asked when Chen rejoined them. "No idea. She's not exactly chatty." "Contractor, right? Probably some kind of marksmanship consultant. They bring people in to evaluate technique, update training protocols." "Maybe." Chen glanced back toward where Kira sat alone. "But did you see her move that wasn't range training? That was something else." Morrison shrugged. "Lots of people can shoot paper. Doesn't mean anything when real rounds start flying." "Yeah." Chen wasn't convinced. "Maybe." The mess hall buzzed with conversation 2 hours later. Operators eating and talking with the focused intensity of men who burned thousands of calories before noon. The topics ranged from deployment stories to equipment complaints to the ongoing speculation about budget cuts that might affect their next training cycle. Kira sat alone in the corner, eating quickly and efficiently, her attention apparently focused on her food. She heard everything. "Saw her groups this morning. Tightest I've ever seen at that distance. Just a contractor man. Probably got lucky, the way she transitioned positions. That wasn't luck. That was muscle memory from real-world operations. You think she's been downrange? I don't know what I think, but I know what I saw." She cataloged each voice, matched it to faces she'd memorized during the morning drills, built profiles in her mind the way she'd been trained to do, assessing threats, identifying potential allies, mapping the social dynamics that would tell her who really held power in this unit versus who just wore the rank. Lieutenant Commander Paulson walked past her table without acknowledging her presence. That told her something. A man who ignored a woman eating alone wasn't neutral. He had already classified her as irrelevant and filed her away. She made a note. At another table, 3 senior operators were discussing an upcoming training exercise. Their conversation was casual, but she caught the undercurrent of concern in their voices. Something about equipment that hadn't been properly maintained. Something about protocols that were being shortcut because the schedule was too compressed. Another note. Petty Officer Chen sat with his team near the center of the room. He was young, probably a few years older than her, with the easy confidence of someone who had earned his place, but hadn't yet learned the difference between competence and wisdom. He kept glancing toward her table when he thought she wouldn't notice. She noticed everything. That was the job. Senior Chief Webb spent his lunch break in his office, staring at a computer screen that told him nothing useful. Thorn Kira, contractor identification number, clearance level that required authorization codes he didn't have. Everything else was redacted black bars covering text that might have explained who she was or where she came from or what she was really doing at his facility. He picked up his desk phone and dialed a number from memory. A woman answered on the 3rd ring, her voice carefully neutral. "Marcus, it's been a while." "I need a favor, Janet." "You always need a favor." "There's a contractor at my facility. Young woman, mid-20s. Shoots better than anyone I've ever trained. Her file is more redacted than any document I've seen in 23 years of service." Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that meant Janet was calculating how much trouble she could get into for helping him. "I can't discuss classified personnel assignments," she said finally. "I'm not asking you to discuss them. I'm asking you to tell me if I should be concerned." "Concerned how?" "Concerned about what she's doing here. Concerned about who sent her. Concerned about what happens when Commander Holloway finds out there's a woman on his advanced range without his personal authorization." Another pause. Longer this time. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to hang up, and we never had this conversation." "I'm listening. Don't interfere. Whatever you think is happening, whatever questions you have, keep them to yourself. Watch, learn, and stay out of her way." The line went dead. Webb sat in the silence of his office for a long time, staring at the redacted file on his screen. He had been in this world long enough to recognize the particular flavor of stonewalling that meant something classified was happening right under his nose. Whatever Kira Thorne was, whoever had sent her, she wasn't just here to observe training protocols. The afternoon drills were more demanding than the morning session. Combat decision-making scenarios, stress position exercises, movement under simulated fire, with instructors shouting conflicting orders to test how operators performed when their cognitive load exceeded comfortable limits. Kira participated in each evolution without complaint. She completed the close quarters battle simulation in the fastest time anyone had recorded that month. She maintained accuracy under fatigue conditions that made seasoned operators start throwing rounds wide. When one of the instructors added an extra 20 pounds to her ruck during a movement drill, a test she understood to see if she would complain or falter, she simply adjusted her gait and finished the course 2 minutes ahead of the next fastest time. "She's making us look bad," Morrison muttered to Chen, as they caught their breath after a particularly grueling exercise. "She's making everyone look bad. Who the hell is she?" Chen shook his head. "I asked. She's not talking. Maybe she's one of those celebrity trainers. Some tactical expert who's made a fortune teaching Hollywood actors how to hold rifles correctly." "Have you seen Hollywood actors shoot? That's not the same thing?" Morrison watched Kira methodically clean her equipment, her movements precise and efficient. "There's something wrong about this whole situation. Nobody's that good. Nobody's that quiet. And nobody gets cleared for advanced drills without us knowing who they are. You think we should tell somebody? Tell them what? That there's a woman here who's better than us. They'll think we're complaining because our egos got bruised." Chen considered that. He wasn't sure Morrison was wrong. That evening, word began to spread through the facility's informal communication networks. A young contractor nobody knew anything about. Shooting scores that defied explanation. A file so classified that even Senior Chief Webb couldn't access it. The rumor mill, that eternal feature of military life, generated theories with its usual enthusiasm. Some thought she was former military, maybe a sniper, who'd been recruited into some black ops program and was now back for reasons nobody could guess. Others suggested she might be from one of the intelligence agencies, CIA or DIA, conducting an evaluation that had more to do with politics than training. A few whispered that she might be investigating something specific, though nobody could agree on what. The truth was simpler and more dangerous than any of them imagined. Kira Thorne had been recruited by Joint Special Operations Command at 19 years old, straight out of Army Sniper School, where she'd set records that still stood. She had spent the next 6 years operating in places that didn't appear on any public map, doing work that would never be acknowledged, building a reputation among the very small community of people cleared to know she existed. She was a Tier 1 operator, one of the best her generation had produced. And she was here because operators were dying. 3 training failures in the past year. One fatality. Allegations of compromised mission readiness that had filtered up through channels until someone at SOCOM had decided to send their best auditor to find out what was going wrong. They had sent her because she was young enough to be dismissed as irrelevant, skilled enough to identify problems that others might miss, and experienced enough to handle whatever resistance she encountered. They had also sent her because she was a woman, and they knew that would reveal something important about the culture at this facility, something that documents and official evaluations couldn't capture. She had understood the assignment immediately. She had also understood the risks. Day 2 began with more of the same. Drills that pushed physical and mental limits. Instructors evaluating performance with varying degrees of attention to detail. Operators performing for the cameras and the evaluators while cutting corners they thought nobody noticed. Kira noticed. She documented a safety violation at 0623, an operator who failed to properly clear his weapon before transitioning to a new drill. The instructor saw it and said nothing. Note: she observed a qualification drill at 0845, where the scoring seemed unusually generous. An operator who should have been flagged for remedial training received a passing mark. Note: she watched a equipment maintenance session at 1100, where shortcuts were being taken that could result in weapon malfunctions under combat conditions. Note: by the end of Day 2, her mental catalog contained 37 specific violations of training protocols, safety standards, and evaluation procedures. Not major failures, not yet, but patterns that revealed something troubling about how this facility operated when nobody was watching closely. Nobody except her. Petty Officer Chen found himself watching her more closely as the day progressed. There was something about the way she moved through the training environment that didn't fit the contractor cover story. Contractors asked questions. They took notes on tablets. They deferred to the operators and instructors who knew the environment. Kira didn't ask questions. She didn't take visible notes. And she deferred to absolutely no one. During a break in the afternoon, drills, Chen positioned himself near where she was hydrating. Not approaching directly this time, he'd learned that lesson, but close enough to observe. She drank water with the same efficiency she did everything else. No wasted motion. No unnecessary actions. She scanned the environment between sips, her eyes moving in patterns that Chen recognized from his own training. She was looking for threats. Not threats like enemy combatants or improvised explosive devices. Threats like people approaching from blind spots. Threats like unexpected changes in the environment. The kind of constant low-level alertness that came from operating in places where letting your guard down got you killed. That wasn't range training. That was survival instinct burned into muscle memory through experience he couldn't imagine. "She's wrong," he said quietly to Morrison later. "Wrong for a contractor, I mean. Wrong for what she's supposed to be." "What do you mean? Watch how she clears rooms during the CQB drills. Watch her sight lines. Watch how she positions herself relative to doorways and windows." "She's good." "She's not good. She's experienced. There's a difference. Good comes from training. What she's got comes from doing it for real." Morrison was quiet for a moment. "You think she's operational?" "I think she's been operational. Past tense. Maybe current tense. I don't know." "Then what's she doing here playing contractor?" Chen didn't have an answer for that. Senior Chief Webb spent Day 2 watching Kira with the kind of attention he usually reserved for operators he was considering for advanced selection programs. He watched her technique, which was flawless. He watched her decision-making, which was faster and more accurate than most instructors. He watched her interact with other personnel, which was minimal and carefully controlled. But mostly, he watched her eyes. She was evaluating everything. Every drill, every instructor, every operator. Her gaze moved, constantly cataloging information with a focus that went far beyond simple observation. She was building a picture of this facility, its strengths, its weaknesses, its failures. The question was for whom Webb had made calls, had leveraged every contact he'd developed over 23 years in this community, had called in favors from people who owed him and from people who didn't. The answers he received were all variations of the same theme. Back off, don't interfere. This is above your pay grade. Whatever Kira Thorne was doing at his facility, it was sanctioned at levels that made his concerns irrelevant. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. On day 3, the atmosphere shifted. Word had arrived through official channels. Commander Derek Holloway was cutting his conference short and returning to the facility. The reason given was routine administrative matters that required his attention, but everyone who had been in the military long enough knew how to read between official lines. Someone had told him about the woman. Kira was aware of the change before any announcement was made. She saw it in the way instructors suddenly became more formal, more careful, in the way operators straightened their postures and double-checked their equipment, in the way conversations died when certain people approached. Commander Holloway cast a long shadow, and that shadow was falling across the facility hours before his physical arrival. She continued her observations with the same quiet focus. If anything, the impending confrontation made the information she was gathering more valuable. How people behaved when they expected their commander to be watching told her something. How they behaved when they didn't told her more. "He's going to lose his mind when he sees her," Morrison said during a break. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular, just voicing what everyone was thinking. "Commander Holloway doesn't approve of women in combat roles," Chen said carefully. "That's not exactly a secret. Doesn't approve the man thinks women in the military should be limited to nursing and administration. He's been fighting against integrated training since before most of us enlisted. She's a contractor, technically outside his chain of command." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think that matters to him? She's on his base, on his range, shooting better than his men. He's going to see that as a personal insult." Chen glanced toward where Kira was methodically field-stripping her rifle. She had to know what was coming. She had to have heard the conversations, felt the shift in atmosphere, but nothing in her demeanor suggested concern. If anything, she seemed calmer than she had been all week. Kira had known this moment was coming since before she arrived at the facility. Commander Derek Holloway's personnel file was one of the documents she'd studied during her pre-assignment briefing. 22 years of service, 4th-generation Navy, a career built on competence that had gradually become indistinguishable from arrogance. Multiple complaints from female personnel that had been filed and forgotten. A pattern of leadership decisions that prioritized his reputation over his unit's effectiveness. He was exactly the kind of leader that created the problems she'd been sent to document. The question wasn't whether they would clash. The question was how badly he would damage himself when they did. She finished cleaning her rifle and reassembled it with movements so familiar they required no conscious thought. Around her, the facility continued its increasingly tense preparation for the commander's return. She was ready. She had been ready since she was 19 years old, standing in a sniper hide in a country that didn't officially exist, learning that the most dangerous enemies weren't always the ones carrying weapons. Sometimes they wore friendly uniforms and carried authority they hadn't earned. The call came at 1847. Commander Holloway's vehicle had passed through the main gate. ETA to the administrative building 7 minutes. The word spread through the facility like fire through dry brush. Suddenly, everyone was where they were supposed to be doing what they were supposed to be doing, looking exactly like a well-run training command was expected to look. Kira observed the transformation with clinical interest. This was what she had been documenting for 3 days, the gap between performance and reality. The way this facility functioned when it thought nobody was watching versus how it looked when the commander was present. The difference was damning. She made her final notes for the day, secured her equipment, and headed toward the small office she'd been assigned. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation everyone was expecting. She would be ready. That night, she sat in her temporary quarters reviewing the documentation she'd compiled. 49 violations across 3 days. Safety issues that could get operators killed. Training shortcuts that produced graduates who looked good on paper but weren't actually prepared for combat. Leadership failures that went all the way to the top. The picture wasn't just troubling. It was dangerous. Somewhere in this facility's training pipeline, operators were being certified as ready for missions they weren't actually prepared to execute. They were being sent downrange with skills that looked sufficient in controlled environments but would fail under real combat stress. That was how people died. That was why she was here. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her commanding officer at SOCOM. Status report. She typed her response, documentation complete, awaiting catalyst. The reply came seconds later. Understood. Authorization confirmed for all necessary measures. She read the message twice, then deleted it. Tomorrow would be decisive. She closed her laptop, performed her nightly equipment check, and allowed herself 6 hours of sleep. Day 4 dawned with the particular tension that precedes inevitable confrontation. Kira arrived at the range at 05:30 earlier than usual. She wanted to be established to be in the middle of her routine when Commander Holloway made his appearance. The positioning mattered. She needed to be exactly where she was supposed to be doing exactly what she had been authorized to do when he tried to remove her. The early morning drills proceeded normally. Operators moved through their evolutions with the heightened awareness that came from knowing their commander was somewhere on base, possibly watching, definitely judging. Kira's performance remained consistent. Perfect groupings, flawless transitions. The kind of shooting that continued to make experienced operators uncomfortable because it highlighted the gap between exceptional and merely good. Senior Chief Webb watched from his usual position in the observation tower. He had barely slept, had spent most of the night trying to understand what was about to happen and how he should respond to it. His instincts told him to protect the young woman who had been placed in his training program without his consultation or consent. She was technically a contractor, technically outside the command structure, but she was also a human being, about to face the wrath of a man who didn't tolerate challenges to his authority. But his phone call with Janet echoed in his memory. Don't interfere. Whatever was coming, he had been told to stay out of it. He wasn't sure he could. Commander Derek Holloway arrived at the range at 08:47. Kira heard him before she saw him. Heavy boots on gravel, moving with the cadence of someone who expected the world to arrange itself around his passage. A voice cutting through the morning air demanding answers from subordinates who scrambled to provide them. She was mid-reload when he entered her field of view. She completed the motion chambered around and put 3 shots into the center of her target at 400 meters. Then she turned. 40 years of age, physically imposing uniform so perfect it looked theatrical. Commander Holloway was everything his reputation suggested a man who had learned to weaponize presence and authority who expected compliance as a natural consequence of his existence. His eyes found her immediately. She watched him process what he was seeing. A young woman, on his range, holding a rifle with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. His face darkened. "Who authorized this?" The words cut across the range like gunfire. Every operator froze. Every instructor stopped what they were doing. The entire facility seemed to hold its breath. Senior Chief Webb moved to intercept his posture, shifting to formal attention. "Sir, she's been cleared by SOCOM. All authorizations are in place." "I don't care if God himself signed the authorization." Holloway hadn't taken his eyes off Kira. "This is my facility. My range. My men. Nobody runs drills here without my personal approval." "Sir, the orders came from—" "I know where the orders came from, Senior Chief. That's not the point." Holloway was moving now, walking toward Kira, with the deliberate stride of a man who intended to make an example. "The point is that decisions were made about my command without my input. The point is that someone thought they could place a contractor in my training program without consulting me." He stopped 10 feet from Kira, close enough that his physical size was meant to be intimidating, far enough that he maintained the appearance of propriety. "You," he said. "What's your name?" "Thorne." Her voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "Thorne. And you think you belong here, on a range where my operators' men who have bled and killed and watched their brothers die are training for missions you can't even imagine?" She said nothing. The silence seemed to infuriate him more than any response could have. "I asked you a question, Thorne. Do you think you belong here?" "I'm authorized to be here, Commander." "Authorized." He made the word sound like an insult. "Authorized by people who don't understand what we do, who think they can impose their political agendas on combat units without consequences." Behind him, the operators watched in uncomfortable silence. Some looked troubled by what they were witnessing. Others seemed to be enjoying it, the spectacle of someone getting put in their place by a commander who didn't tolerate challenges. Chen caught Morrison's eye and saw his own concern reflected there. This was wrong. Everyone knew it was wrong. But nobody moved. Kira had faced men like Holloway before. In briefing rooms where her presence was resented. In combat units where her skills were dismissed until she proved them under fire. In 100 small and large ways, she had learned that some men couldn't accept the idea that a woman might be their equal or their superior. She had also learned that these men were dangerous, not because they were competent, though some were, but because their need to assert dominance overrode their judgment. They made decisions based on ego rather than evidence. They created environments where truth was suppressed and reality was distorted to match their expectations. Commander Holloway was exactly this kind of danger. And she had been sent here specifically to expose him. "You have impressive paperwork, Thorne." Holloway's voice had dropped to something more controlled, more dangerous. "Someone at SOCOM thinks you're qualified to observe my training program. Someone thinks a young woman with a contractor badge has something to contribute to a facility that produces the finest warriors in the world." He stepped closer. "But paperwork doesn't mean anything to me. Clearances don't mean anything to me. What matters is performance. What matters is whether you can actually do the job, or whether you're just another political appointment designed to check boxes and make civilians feel good about their military." Kira met his eyes without flinching. "My performance speaks for itself, Commander." "Does it?" He turned to address the assembled operators. "Did you all see that the contractor thinks her performance speaks for itself? She thinks that because she can put holes in paper at distance, she belongs here with men who have done real work, who have accomplished real missions, who have earned their place through blood and sacrifice. He turned back to Kira. You haven't earned anything. You've been given access by bureaucrats who don't understand what we do, and I'm going to make sure that access is terminated before the end of the day. That's not your decision to make, Commander. The words hung in the air. Holloway's expression froze, then slowly transformed into something ugly. What did you just say? I said that's not your decision to make. Kira's voice remained steady. My authorization came from SOCOM. My assignment came from Joint Special Operations Command. You can file whatever objections you want through whatever channels you want, but I'll be finishing my work here, regardless of your personal feelings about my presence. The range had gone absolutely silent. Nobody spoke to Commander Holloway like that. Nobody challenged him publicly. Nobody, especially not a young woman contractor, told him that his authority had limits. For a long moment, he just stared at her. His face had gone red. A vein pulsed in his temple. His hands hanging at his sides had curled into fists. Then he smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just decided to teach a lesson that wouldn't be forgotten. You know what I am? He asked the question loudly, projecting to the entire range. I'm a Navy SEAL. I've been doing this job since before you were born. I've led missions in places that don't exist on any map. I've made decisions that determined whether men lived or died. He stepped even closer. And you're nothing. You're a political statement with a rifle. You're someone's idea of progress that doesn't understand the cost of the progress that actually matters. Kira's expression didn't change. You're 25 years old, Holloway continued. You haven't seen anything. You haven't done anything. And you certainly haven't earned the right to stand on this range and tell me what decisions I can or cannot make. He reached toward her shoulder. Don't. One word. Quiet as a trigger pull. Holloway's hand kept moving. I said don't. His palm made contact. Yink. 3 seconds. That was all it took. In the first second, Kira's left hand trapped his wrist in a joint lock that hyperextended the tendons and sent signals of excruciating pain racing up his arm. In the second second, she pivoted inside his stance, using his own forward momentum to destroy his balance. Her hip became a fulcrum. His mass became a liability. In the third second, Commander Derek Holloway's feet left the ground. He hit the dirt face first with a force that drove the air from his lungs and left his ears ringing. The impact was loud enough that several operators flinched at the sound. Kira stepped back, her hands returning to her sides, her breathing unchanged. She looked down at him without expression. 40 operators stood frozen in various postures of shock. The junior officers who had accompanied Holloway were reaching for their sidearms before freezing in uncertainty what exactly were they supposed to do. Senior Chief Webb stood motionless in the observation tower, his face carved from stone. You assaulted me, Holloway gasped from the ground. Kira reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a slim black folder. She dropped it in the dirt beside him. Open it. He stared at the folder like it was a live grenade. His hands shook as he picked it up, brushed off the dirt, flipped it open. The first page was a DD Form 254, the Department of Defense classification notice for materials requiring security clearances above routine levels. His eyes moved down the page. Name Thorne, Kira, position Tier 1 Operator, Joint Special Operations Command, classification TS-SCI, with Special Access Program Authority. His face went pale. Mission history. Redacted. 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 At the bottom of the last page, in small text, investigation initiated following 3 training failures, 1 fatality, and allegations of compromised mission readiness. He looked up at her with something approaching horror. You assaulted a federal auditor commander. Her voice carried across the range. In front of 40 witnesses, during a classified investigation into why your training program has been getting operators killed. The silence that followed was crushing. Everything Commander Derek Holloway thought he knew about his world, his authority, his career, all of it shattered in that moment. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. And 40 of his own men had watched him make it. The folder slipped from Holloway's fingers and hit the dirt with a soft thud that seemed louder than any gunshot fired that morning. Kira stood motionless, watching him process information that was systematically dismantling everything he believed about himself and his authority. She had seen this moment before with other commanders, other leaders whose confidence had calcified into arrogance. The realization always followed the same pattern: denial, confusion, then the desperate search for some way to make reality conform to their expectations. Holloway pushed himself to his knees, his breathing ragged. Dirt clung to his immaculate uniform. The pressed creases he had maintained with such care were now wrinkled and stained, a physical manifestation of what had just happened to his career. "This is a mistake," he said. His voice cracked on the last word. "Someone made a mistake. You can't be Tier 1, Kira finished for him. "Joint Special Operations Command, 6 years operational, recruited at 19 out of Army Sniper School, where I set records that still stand." She paused. "Would you like me to continue, Commander, or would you prefer to read the rest yourself?" Senior Chief Webb moved down from the observation tower with deliberate speed. His boots hit the gravel with measured steps, each one carrying him closer to a situation he had been warned not to interfere with, but could no longer avoid. "Everyone back to your positions," he called out. "Training continues in 15 minutes. Nobody moved. Webb's voice hardened. "I said positions. Now." The operators began to disperse, but slowly, reluctantly. They kept glancing back at the tableau, their commander on his knees in the dirt, the young woman standing over him with the calm authority of someone who had just rewritten the power structure of the entire facility. Chen was among the last to turn away. His eyes met Kira's for just a moment, and something passed between them, recognition perhaps, or understanding. He had suspected she was more than she appeared. Now he knew exactly how much more. Holloway finally managed to stand. His legs were unsteady beneath him, and he reached out automatically to grab something for support before realizing there was nothing there. He stood alone, exposed, with 40 of his men having just witnessed his complete humiliation. "You set me up," he said quietly. "No." Kira's response was immediate and flat. "You set yourself up. I gave you every opportunity to walk away. I told you not to touch me. You made your choice. I didn't know. You didn't ask." She stepped closer, lowering her voice, so only he could hear. "That's the problem, Commander. You looked at me and saw what you expected to see. A young woman who didn't belong. A contractor who could be intimidated. Someone beneath you who needed to be reminded of her place." She picked up the folder and brushed the dirt from its cover. "You never considered the possibility that you might be wrong, that your assumptions might be based on prejudice rather than evidence, that the person standing in front of you might know things you don't, might have done things you can't imagine, might be here for reasons that have nothing to do with your ego." Holloway's jaw tightened. The initial shock was fading, replaced by something harder. Anger. Resentment. The desperate need to salvage something from the wreckage of what had just happened. "You think this changes anything?" His voice had found its edge again. You think dropping me on my back in front of my men gives you authority here? I've been running this command for 6 years. My training program has produced more Tier 1 candidates than any other facility in naval special warfare. Your training program killed a petty officer 8 months ago. The words landed like a physical blow. Holloway's face went white. That was an accident. The investigation was compromised from the beginning. Kira opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Safety protocols that weren't followed, equipment that hadn't been properly maintained, an operator who should have been flagged for additional training but was passed through because your schedule didn't allow for delays. She held the paper out to him. Petty Officer Marcus Reyes, 24 years old, married for 8 months. His widow is still waiting for someone to tell her the truth about how her husband died. Holloway didn't take the paper. His eyes were fixed on her face, searching for something: weakness, uncertainty, any crack in the armor of calm certainty she projected. He found nothing. That's why I'm here, Commander. Not to prove a point about women in combat. Not to advance some political agenda. I'm here because your negligence killed an operator, and Command wants to know how many more are going to die if nothing changes. Webb had reached them now. He stood slightly behind Kira, his posture communicating support without explicitly taking sides. Years of navigating military politics had taught him how to position himself in moments of institutional crisis. Commander, he said carefully, perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more private. Holloway turned on him with sudden fury. You knew what she was, and you didn't tell me. I was ordered not to tell you, sir, by people whose authority exceeds yours and mine combined. Don't give me that. You've been at this facility for 8 years. You answer to me, not to some anonymous bureaucrats at SOCOM. With respect, sir, that's exactly the kind of thinking that got us here. The words hung in the air. Webb had just openly challenged his commanding officer in front of a federal auditor. It was a career-ending move under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Holloway stared at him with an expression of betrayal that slowly morphed into bitter recognition. He was alone. His authority had been stripped away in seconds, and the people he had counted on to support him were positioning themselves for whatever came next. Fine, he said finally. His voice had gone flat, drained of its earlier fury. You want to discuss this privately? Let's go discuss it. Let's find out exactly what you think you know about my command. Kira nodded once. Your office. 15 minutes. Bring your training records for the past 18 months. She walked away without waiting for acknowledgement, her stride unhurried, but purposeful. The operators who hadn't yet returned to their positions parted to let her through, watching her pass, with expressions that ranged from stunned admiration to barely concealed resentment. Chen fell into step beside Morrison as they walked toward the range. Did that actually just happen? Morrison asked. I think so. She dropped the commander in 3 seconds, in front of the entire unit. I was there. I saw it. And she's Tier 1, like actual Tier 1, the people who do the missions that don't exist. Chen thought about the way Kira had moved during the takedown. The economy of motion. The absolute control over her body and her emotions. The way she had assessed the threat and neutralized it with no wasted effort and no hesitation. Yeah, he said. She's the real thing. Jesus. Morrison shook his head slowly. I said she probably froze up when things got real. I said she was just a contractor who got lucky on the range. We all underestimated her. That was the point. What do you mean? She wasn't just observing our training protocols. She was observing us, how we treated her, how we talked about her, how we responded to a woman in our space. Chen paused. We showed her exactly who we are. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. And who are we? I don't know anymore. But I'm starting to think the answer isn't what we thought it was. The office that Commander Holloway had occupied for 6 years felt smaller than it ever had. The walls seemed to press inward the certificates and photographs that displayed his career achievements, now looking like artifacts from someone else's life. He sat behind his desk, because that was what commanders did. They occupied positions of authority. They maintained the appearance of control even when control was an illusion. Kira sat across from him with the folder open on her lap. Senior Chief Webb stood near the door, a silent witness to whatever was about to unfold. 49 violations, Kira said without preamble. In 3 days of observation, I documented 49 specific violations of training protocols, safety standards, and evaluation procedures. Holloway's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. That's impossible. Your instructors have been trained to maintain appearances. They know what things are supposed to look like when someone's watching. The problem is that nobody's been watching closely enough. She pulled out a sheet of paper. Day 1. An operator failed to clear his weapon properly during a transition drill. The instructor observed it and said nothing. 1 mistake. Day 1 continued. Qualification scoring that was inconsistent with actual performance. An operator who should have been flagged for remedial training received a passing mark. The evaluation criteria. Day 2. Equipment maintenance shortcuts that could result in weapon malfunctions under combat conditions. Deferred inspections that were signed off as completed when they weren't. Budget constraints. Day 3. An operator showing signs of fatigue that should have resulted in temporary removal from high-risk drills. Instead, he was pushed to continue. He nearly had an accidental discharge that could have killed 3 people. Holloway's protests had died in his throat. Each item she listed was accompanied by times, locations, and the names of personnel involved. She hadn't just observed, she had documented everything with the precision of someone building a legal case, because that's exactly what she was doing. This isn't about one violation, Kira continued. This isn't about an accident or an oversight or a bad day. This is a pattern, a culture that prioritizes looking good over being good, a command structure that punishes people for raising concerns and rewards people for maintaining the facade. She closed the folder. Petty Officer Marcus Reyes died because that culture failed him. He died because the people responsible for his training decided that maintaining the schedule was more important than ensuring he was actually ready. He died because nobody at this facility had the courage to say that something was wrong. Holloway sat in silence for a long moment. The anger that had carried him through the initial confrontation had burned away, leaving something emptier behind. I've dedicated 22 years to this, he said finally. My family has served in naval special warfare for 4 generations. This program, this facility, this is everything I've worked for. Then you should have taken care of it. I did take care of it. I pushed for excellence. I demanded the best from my operators. You demanded the appearance of excellence. Kira's voice remained steady, but there was something harder underneath it now. There's a difference. And you've been confusing the two for so long that you can't even see it anymore. Webb shifted uncomfortably near the door. He had known that there were problems with the training program he had raised concerns himself quietly through proper channels. But he hadn't understood how deep those problems went, or how systematically they had been ignored. What happens now? Holloway asked. My report goes to SOCOM within the hour. They'll conduct a formal review. You'll be relieved of command pending investigation. Senior Chief Webb will assume temporary oversight of the facility. And my career? That's not my decision. Kira stood tucking the folder under her arm. But if I were you, I'd start thinking about what kind of man you want to be for whatever comes next. Because the man you've been isn't someone this community can afford anymore. She walked toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Commander. He looked up at her. You asked me if I belonged here. The answer is yes. I've earned my place through 6 years of operations that you'll never be cleared to know about. I've lost teammates. I've made kills that keep me awake at night. I've done things in service to this country that most people can't imagine. Her voice dropped lower. So the next time you want to question someone's credentials, make sure you know what those credentials actually are. She left without waiting for a response. The click of the closing door seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Holloway stared at the space where she had stood, his mind still trying to process the complete destruction of everything he had built. His authority, his reputation, his legacy. All of it reduced to ashes in a matter of hours. Webb cleared his throat. Sir, I need to begin organizing the transition of command. With your permission, just do it. Holloway's voice was hollow. Do whatever needs to be done. Yes, sir. Webb left, closing the door gently behind him. Alone in his office, Commander Derek Holloway sat motionless as the afternoon light gradually shifted across his walls. The certificates, the photographs, the framed letters of commendation from admirals and generals who had praised his leadership. All of it meaningless now. He thought about what Kira had said about Petty Officer Reyes, 24 years old, married for 8 months, dead because people under Holloway's command had cut corners and he hadn't noticed, or hadn't wanted to notice. That was the truth he couldn't escape. He had seen the warning signs, had heard the concerns raised by instructors who worried about schedule pressure and equipment issues, had been told that something might be wrong with the training pipeline. And he had dismissed it all, because acknowledging problems would have meant admitting that his command wasn't as perfect as he needed it to be, because raising concerns would have threatened his reputation, because the appearance of success had become more important than success itself. Marcus Reyes had paid for that failure with his life, and Holloway was only now beginning to understand what that meant. The report uploaded to SOCOM's classified server at 17:43 hours. Kira sat in her temporary office watching the progress bar complete, knowing that the document she had just transmitted would set in motion a chain of events that would reshape the entire facility. Investigations, reforms, personnel changes, the kind of institutional disruption that would take months or years to fully work through. But that was for others to handle now. Her job was to document and report, to force systems to confront their failures, to make problems impossible to ignore even when people desperately wanted to ignore them. She had done that work here. What came next wasn't her responsibility. A knock on her doorframe made her turn. Petty Officer Chen stood there, still in his training gear, looking uncertain about whether he should have come. "Ma'am, do you have a moment?" She gestured to the empty chair across from her desk. He sat down with the careful posture of someone who wasn't entirely sure what kind of conversation he was walking into. "I wanted to apologize," he said. For not seeing it, for not recognizing what you were." He paused, struggling with something. For standing there and doing nothing when Commander Holloway was out of line. Kira studied him for a moment. He was young, late 20s probably, with the earnest intensity of someone who still believed that doing the right thing should be simple. "You're not responsible for his actions," she said quietly. "Maybe not. But I'm responsible for mine." We all just stood there. We watched him try to intimidate you, listened to him say things that were clearly wrong, and nobody did anything. There were 40 of you. He was your commanding officer. The institutional pressure to stay silent was enormous. That doesn't make it right. No, Kira agreed. It doesn't. But recognizing that is the first step toward doing better next time. Chen was quiet for a long moment, Can I ask you something? You can ask. I might not answer. The operations you mentioned. The missions that don't officially exist. How do you do it? How do you function at that level while people around you constantly underestimate you because of what you look like? It was a genuine question asked without malice or skepticism. He wanted to understand. You learn to separate what people think from what's true, Kira said. You learn that their assumptions are about them, not about you. And you learn that the work speaks for itself eventually, even if nobody else ever hears about it. That sounds lonely. Sometimes it is. She allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. But it's also freeing. When you stop caring about what people expect, you can focus entirely on what needs to be done. You can make decisions based on reality instead of perception. You can be effective instead of just impressive. Chen nodded slowly, processing her words. What happens to Commander Holloway now? That's not for me to decide. The investigation will determine consequences. But what do you think should happen? Kira considered the question carefully. I think he's a man who lost his way. He started out believing in something real service excellence, the mission. But somewhere along the line he started believing in himself instead, in his reputation, in the idea that his authority was more important than the truth. She paused. There might be something worth saving in him, a version of the man he was before he forgot what actually mattered. But he's the only one who can find that, and right now I don't know if he wants to. After Chen left, Kira finished securing her materials and prepared for the series of debriefings that would occupy the next several days. Conference calls with SOCOM leadership, follow-up questions from investigators, the bureaucratic aftermath that always followed operational work, whether that work involved bullets or documentation. Her phone buzzed with a message from Captain Morrison at headquarters. Report received. Command conference scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. Outstanding work. She read it once, then set the phone aside. Outstanding work. She wondered if the widow of Marcus Reyes would see it that way. If knowing that her husband's death had finally forced changes would provide any comfort, or if it would only deepen the pain of knowing those changes should have happened before he died. Some questions didn't have answers. Some victories felt exactly like losses. That was the weight of this work, knowing that even success meant you had arrived too late to prevent the failures you were documenting. That the best outcome was making sure the same mistakes didn't kill anyone else. Outside her window, the facility continued its operations with the heightened awareness that came from knowing everything was about to change. Operators trained. Instructors evaluated. The machinery of military preparation ground forward regardless of what was happening in command offices and conference rooms. But underneath the surface, something had shifted. Kira had seen it in the faces of the operators who had witnessed her confrontation with Holloway. In the questions Chen had asked. In the way Webb had positioned himself during the aftermath, not defending his commander, but preparing for what came next. The facade had cracked. Now the real work of rebuilding could begin. She gathered her materials, secured her temporary workspace, and headed toward the quarters where she would spend one final night at this facility before returning to SOCOM headquarters for debriefing. Tomorrow would bring another round of questions and documentation and the slow machinery of institutional change. But tonight, the immediate work was done. She had forced a system to confront its failures. What it did with that confrontation was no longer up to her. The conference call began at 0800 sharp. Kira sat alone in a secure briefing room at SOCOM headquarters in Tampa, her laptop displaying the faces of 4 senior officers who would determine how her report would reshape naval special warfare training across the entire command. Captain Morrison spoke first. Operative Thorne, your documentation has been reviewed at the highest levels. The findings are comprehensive. Thank you, sir. Comprehensive and damning. Admiral Chen, no relation to the petty officer she had met at Virginia Beach, leaned forward in his video window. 49 violations. 1 fatality directly attributed to training failures. A command culture that systematically suppressed concerns about safety and effectiveness. Kira said nothing. The facts spoke for themselves. Commander Holloway has been officially relieved of command as of 0600 this morning, Morrison continued. He's been reassigned to administrative duties pending the outcome of the formal investigation. What about the facility itself? Senior Chief Webb has assumed temporary command. Your recommendations for protocol reforms are being implemented immediately. Morrison paused, his expression shifting to something more personal. There's something else you should know. Kira waited. Holloway has requested a meeting with you, through his legal counsel. He says he has information about the Reyes incident that wasn't in the official record. The words hit her like a physical blow. Information that wasn't in the official record meant one of 2 things either. Holloway was trying to negotiate his way out of consequences, or there was something about that training death that went deeper than anyone had realized. What kind of information? He wouldn't say. Only that he'll share it with you personally, and only with you. Admiral Chen frowned. This could be a manipulation tactic, a way to buy time or muddy the investigation. It could be, Kira agreed, or it could be exactly what he says it is. You're willing to meet with him? She thought about Marcus Reyes, 24 years old, 8 months married, dead because people had failed him. If there's more to know about how that operator died, I need to know it. Morrison nodded slowly. The meeting is scheduled for 1400 today. His temporary assignment is at Naval Station Norfolk. We'll have transport ready. The call ended, and Kira sat in silence for a long moment. Something about this didn't feel right. Holloway was a man whose entire identity had been shattered. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. The investigation would likely result in formal charges that could end with court-martial and imprisonment. Why would a man in that position suddenly want to talk the transport from Tampa to Norfolk took just under 3 hours? Kira spent most of that time reviewing everything she knew about the Reyes incident. The official investigation had concluded that equipment failure combined with operator error had resulted in the fatal accident. Standard findings for a training death that nobody wanted to examine too closely. But her own investigation had revealed layers beneath that official narrative. Maintenance logs that had been falsified, qualification records that didn't match actual performance, a systematic pattern of shortcuts that created the conditions for tragedy. What she hadn't found was intent. The failures she had documented were the result of negligence, not malice. Bad leadership, not criminal conspiracy. A culture that valued appearance over substance, not a deliberate effort to harm anyone. But Holloway's request to meet suggested there might be more. The administrative building where he had been assigned was a gray concrete structure that housed the kind of bureaucratic work that kept large organizations functioning without anyone noticing. Paper pushers and data entry clerks and middle managers who had found their level in a system that valued competence over ambition. Holloway was waiting in a small conference room on the 3rd floor. He looked different than he had on the range. The arrogance had drained out of him, leaving something smaller behind. His civilian clothes hung on him like they belonged to someone else. The man who had stormed onto that range demanding answers now looked like someone searching for questions he was afraid to ask. Operative Thorne. His voice was quiet. Thank you for coming. You said you have information about the Reyes incident. I do. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Please, this might take a while. Kira sat, but didn't relax. Her body remained alert, ready to move if necessary. Trust was earned, not given, and this man had done nothing to earn hers. Start talking. Holloway took a deep breath. Marcus Reyes didn't die because of equipment failure or operator error. He died because someone wanted him dead. The words hung in the air between them. Explain. There's a group within Naval Special Warfare. Informal. No official standing. They call themselves the Brotherhood. Holloway's hands were trembling slightly. They've been around for decades. Started as a mentorship network, senior operators looking out for junior ones, making sure the right people got the right assignments. And now they're something else. They decide who advances and who doesn't, who gets the good deployments and who gets stuck in dead-end positions. They protect their members and destroy anyone who threatens their control. Kira's mind was racing. If what Holloway was saying was true, it explained patterns she had noticed but hadn't been able to connect. Unexplained career trajectories, investigations that went nowhere, concerns that were raised and then quietly buried. What does this have to do with Reyes? Marcus was asking questions. He'd noticed irregularities in training records, the same ones you found. He was putting together documentation to take to the Inspector General. Holloway's voice cracked. Someone in the Brotherhood decided he was a threat. You're saying he was murdered. I'm saying his death wasn't an accident. The equipment failure was engineered. The conditions that led to the incident were deliberately created. Holloway met her eyes. And I knew about it. Not before it happened, but after. When the investigation started going in directions that should have revealed the truth, I was approached. Told to make sure the findings stayed within acceptable parameters. You covered up a murder. I told myself I didn't have a choice, that the Brotherhood was too powerful to fight, that going along was the only way to protect my career, my family, He stopped, his composure crumbling. I told myself a lot of things that let me sleep at night. None of them were true. Kira sat absolutely still, processing the magnitude of what she had just heard. This wasn't a training failure. This was conspiracy, obstruction of justice, accessory to murder. And Holloway had just confessed to all of it. Why are you telling me this now? Because you already destroyed me. Something that might have been a laugh escaped his throat. When you dropped me on that range, you didn't just end my career. You ended the version of me that could justify what I'd done. I've been lying to myself for 8 months, telling myself that Marcus's death was a tragedy but not a crime. That I was protecting important institutions by staying silent. He leaned forward. But you forced me to see what I really am. A coward. Someone who valued his position more than someone else's life. Someone who let a young man's killer go free because challenging the system was too frightening. The Brotherhood, Kira said. Who are the members? I don't know all of them. It's compartmentalized. You only know the people immediately above and below you in the network. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. But I know some names, high-ranking officers, people with enough power to destroy anyone who threatens them. He held out the paper. That's why I wanted to talk to you specifically. You're outside their reach. Your chain of command goes through JSOC, not Naval Special Warfare. And after what you did to me, everyone knows you can't be intimidated. Kira took the paper, but didn't look at it. Her eyes stayed fixed on Holloway's face. You realize what happens now. If what you're saying is true, you're going to prison. You'll lose everything, your pension, your freedom, whatever's left of your reputation. I know. And you're doing this anyway. I'm doing this because it's the only way to live with myself. His voice steadied slightly. You asked me what kind of man I wanted to be for whatever comes next. I've been thinking about that. The answer is not the man who let Marcus Reyes's murderer go free. Kira unfolded the paper and scanned the names. Her blood went cold. 3 names she recognized. Senior officers she had worked with. People who had authority over training facilities, personnel assignments, and operational deployments across the entire naval special warfare community. One name she knew personally. Captain James Morrison. The officer who had just briefed her this morning. The man who had arranged this meeting. Morrison is Brotherhood. Her voice came out flat, controlled, but something dark was building beneath the surface. He's one of the senior leaders, has been for 15 years. Holloway watched her reaction. You didn't know? He's my contact at SOCOM. He's been receiving my reports directly. The implications cascaded through her mind. If Morrison was compromised, then everything she had documented about the Virginia Beach facility might never reach the people who could actually act on it. Her reports could be buried. Her recommendations could be ignored. The reforms she had fought for could be quietly shelved. And anyone who had cooperated with her investigation, Senior Chief Webb Petty Officer Chen, the operators who had started questioning the culture of their facility, could be targeted for retaliation. I need to make a call. She pulled out her phone, but Holloway reached across the table and grabbed her wrist. Wait. If Morrison knows you're onto them, you won't leave this building alive. Let go of me. I'm trying to help you. The Brotherhood has people everywhere. Security personnel, military police, even some of the people who flew you here today. If you try to blow the whistle right now before you have a plan, they'll stop you. Kira's training kicked in. She assessed the room. One door, no windows, no obvious weapons within reach. Holloway's grip on her wrist was firm but not threatening. He was scared, not aggressive. Then what do you suggest? There's a journalist, investigative reporter who's been looking into irregularities in special operations for years. She's built relationships with sources inside the community. She has the infrastructure to protect whistleblowers and get information out even when the system tries to suppress it. You want me to go to the press. I want you to survive, and I want the truth to come out. He released her wrist. The Brotherhood has spent decades building their power inside military institutions. The only way to break them is to take the fight outside those institutions to a place where they can't control what happens. Kira thought about the risks. Going to a journalist with classified information was a career-ending move, at minimum potentially criminal, depending on what she revealed. She would be trading everything she had built her position, her access, her ability to operate for the chance to expose something that powerful people wanted kept hidden. But Marcus Reyes deserved justice. And the operators who might die next if the Brotherhood continued operating deserved protection. The journalist's name? Sarah Blackwell. She works for the Washington Post. I have a secure way to contact her. How do I know I can trust you? 30 minutes ago, you were a man who covered up a murder. Now you want me to believe you're trying to do the right thing. Holloway's face crumpled. You can't trust me. I don't deserve trust. But you can verify everything I've told you. The names on that paper, the patterns of assignments and promotions, the investigations that went nowhere, it will all check out if you look closely enough. He paused. And you can verify one more thing. Check the flight manifest for the aircraft that brought you here today. See who authorized it. See who had access to your travel arrangements. Kira pulled up the information on her phone. The authorization had come from Captain Morrison's office. He had known exactly where she would be and when. If the Brotherhood wanted to eliminate a threat before she could expose them, she had just been delivered directly into their hands. We need to move. Now. She was already standing, her body shifting into operational mode. Holloway rose with her, his movement slower and less coordinated. There's a side exit on the second floor, service stairwell that's not usually monitored. How do you know? Because I've spent the last week planning for this moment, figuring out how to get you alone, how to tell you what I know without being stopped. He moved toward the door. I hoped you would believe me, but I also prepared for the possibility that we'd need to run. They moved through the corridor quickly, Holloway leading. His knowledge of the building's layout proved accurate. The service stairwell was empty, the second-floor exit unguarded. They emerged into a parking area reserved for administrative personnel. My car's over there, Holloway said. We can... Operative Thorne. The voice came from behind them. Kira turned to see 3 men in civilian clothes approaching from the main entrance. Their movements were coordinated, their positioning designed to cut off escape routes. Military precision hidden beneath casual appearances. Captain Morrison would like to speak with you, the lead man said. There's been a development in the investigation that requires your immediate attention. I wasn't informed of any development. It's a sensitive matter. Best discussed in private. Kira counted the seconds, calculated distances and angles. 3 men armed, she could see the bulges beneath their jackets. Open ground with minimal cover. Holloway beside her liability rather than asset in a physical confrontation. Tell the captain I'll be in touch. That's not an option, ma'am. He was very specific about wanting to see you now. The lead man's hand moved toward his jacket. Kira struck first. Her palm connected with his throat before he completed the motion. He went down, choking his weapon still holstered. She pivoted, caught the second man's arm, as he reached for his gun, twisted until she felt the joint separate. His scream masked the sound of her foot connecting with the third man's knee. 3 seconds. 3 men disabled. She grabbed Holloway's arm and pulled him toward the nearest vehicle, a government sedan, with keys visible through the window. Standard military motor pool practice. Convenient for her purposes. Get in. Drive. Holloway fumbled with the door, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the handle. Kira circled to the passenger side, keeping her eyes on the building entrance where more people were beginning to emerge. Now, Holloway. He got the car started. The tires squealed as they pulled out of the parking area, narrowly avoiding the security personnel, who were now running toward them with weapons drawn. Where are we going? His voice was pitched high with panic. Away from here, then we find Sarah Blackwell. The car accelerated onto the main road, leaving the naval station behind. But Kira knew this was only the beginning. They had escaped the immediate trap, but the Brotherhood would be mobilizing every resource to find them. Her face would be on security alerts within hours. Her access to military systems would be revoked. She would become a fugitive from the very institutions she had dedicated her life to serving, all because she had chosen to pursue the truth instead of accepting the convenient lie. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We know where you are. Come back and we can discuss this like professionals. Resist and we will find everyone you've ever cared about. She deleted the message without responding. They're tracking the phone, she said. I need to get rid of it. There's a burner in the glove compartment. I bought it yesterday. She opened the compartment and found the cheap prepaid phone. Holloway had indeed been planning for this moment. You knew they would try to stop me. I suspected. The Brotherhood doesn't leave loose ends. When you started documenting everything at Virginia Beach, you became a threat. When you took down me, the commanding officer they had installed specifically to protect their operations, you became an enemy. They put you in charge of that facility. They put me everywhere, promoted me ahead of more qualified candidates because I was loyal, gave me commands I hadn't earned because I could be trusted to protect their interests. The bitterness in his voice was sharp. I told myself I deserved it, that I was talented and my advancement was natural, but they were using me the whole time. Kira threw her military phone out the window, watching it shatter on the pavement. Where's Blackwell based? DC. She works out of the Post's main office, but she has a secure location for meeting sources. Can you get us there without using roads they're likely to monitor? I think so. Back roads, secondary highways. It'll take longer, but it's possible. Then do it. The car turned off the main route onto a smaller road that wound through suburban developments and patches of preserved woodland. Holloway drove with surprising focus, his earlier panic settling into determined concentration. "Can I ask you something?" he said after several minutes of silence. "You can ask." "When you came to Virginia Beach, did you know about the Brotherhood, I mean? Was that part of what you were investigating?" "No. I was sent to examine training failures. The Reyes death, the qualification issues, the protocol violations. Nobody mentioned anything about a conspiracy." "Then your report won't." "My report documented what I observed. The patterns of failure, the culture of suppression, the leadership that prioritized reputation over safety." She paused. "But if what you're telling me is true, those patterns are symptoms of something bigger. The Brotherhood isn't just protecting incompetent officers. They're actively sabotaging operators who threaten their control. They're worse than that." Holloway's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Marcus Reyes wasn't the first. Over the past decade, there have been at least 6 training deaths that follow the same pattern. Questions that were raised, investigations that were contained. Operators who knew too much and died in accidents that weren't accidents. 6 deaths. That I know about. There might be more." Kira felt the weight of that number pressing down on her. 6 families who had been told their sons or daughters died in training accidents. 6 investigations that had concluded with findings of equipment failure or operator error. 6 murders hidden behind the institutional machinery of military bureaucracy. And the people responsible were still in positions of power, still making decisions about who lived and who died, still protected by a system that had been designed to serve them. "We need evidence," she said. "Names and allegations won't be enough. Blackwell will need documents, records, something concrete that proves what happened. The maintenance logs from the Reyes incident. The real ones, not the falsified versions that went into the official record. I have access to a secure storage location where the originals are kept. The Brotherhood kept evidence that could incriminate them. Insurance, mutually assured destruction. If anyone in the network tries to break ranks, the others have proof that can bring them down too." Holloway's laugh was hollow. "I never understood why they trusted me enough to tell me where it was. Now I realize they were just confident I would never have the courage to use it." "Where is this storage location?" "Richmond. A private security facility that caters to government contractors. High-end encryption, biometric access, no questions asked about what's being stored." "How far?" 2 hours from here. Maybe less if we push it." Kira calculated the risks. 2 hours was a long time to be on the road when people were actively searching for them. But if they could get the original documentation, they would have something concrete to give Blackwell. Something that could break the Brotherhood's control over the institutions they had corrupted. "Do it!" The car accelerated. Behind them, the sun was beginning to set. Ahead of them, the road stretched toward Richmond and whatever waited there. Kira's hand moved unconsciously to her sidearm, checking that it was secure ready. The mission had changed. She wasn't just documenting failures anymore. She was going to war. The security facility stood at the end of a quiet industrial road surrounded by other nondescript buildings that housed server farms and document storage companies, the kind of place designed to be forgettable. Holloway pulled the car into a parking space and killed the engine. His hands were still trembling, but less than before. The act of driving, of having a concrete task to focus on, had steadied him somewhat. "The storage unit is on the 3rd floor, he said. "Biometric access, my fingerprint and retinal scan. Security personnel. 2 guards at the front desk. Usually one more doing rounds. They're private contractors, not Brotherhood. They won't know who we are or why we're here. Kira assessed the building. Standard commercial security setup. Cameras at the entrance and in the corridors. Electronic access control on every door. Nothing she couldn't handle, but nothing she could rush through either. How long to retrieve the documents? 10 minutes, maybe 15 if the system runs slow. Then let's move. They walked toward the entrance with the casual pace of people who belonged there. The front desk guard looked up as they approached, his expression professionally neutral. "Evening. Can I help you?" "Unit 3117, Holloway said. "Monthly access check." The guard consulted his screen, then nodded. "You're on the list. Sign in here, please." Holloway signed. Kira provided a false name and contractor identification that would pass basic scrutiny. The guard barely glanced at either signature before buzzing them through. The elevator ride was silent. When the doors opened on the third floor, Kira's instincts immediately registered something wrong. The corridor was empty, which was normal, but the air had a quality to it, a stillness that suggested recent disturbance rather than peaceful vacancy. "Holloway, wait." He stopped, his body tensing. "What is it? Stay behind me." She moved forward slowly, her hand resting on her sidearm. The corridor stretched ahead of them, storage unit doors lining both sides. The lighting was harsh fluorescent, eliminating shadows, but creating a sterile uniformity that made it difficult to distinguish details at distance. Unit 317 was at the far end. They were halfway there when the door of Unit 312 opened. Captain James Morrison stepped out. He was flanked by two men in tactical gear, both armed with suppressed pistols. Their weapons were already trained on Kira and Holloway. "Operative Thorne." Morrison's voice was calm, almost conversational. "You're a difficult woman to anticipate. Most people in your position would have tried to reach official channels, file a report through proper procedures. You went straight to the source. You knew we'd come here. I knew Derek would eventually break. He's been showing signs of conscience for months. The only question was when and who he would try to confess to." Morrison shook his head with what appeared to be genuine disappointment. "I had hoped to contain the situation before it reached this point. Your investigation at Virginia Beach accelerated the timeline considerably." "The Brotherhood," Kira said. "How long?" 32 years. I was recruited as a lieutenant commander. The organization was smaller then, more focused. We genuinely believed we were protecting the community from the kind of bureaucratic interference that got good operators killed." He sighed. Somewhere along the way, that mission became something else. Self-perpetuation. Power for its own sake. The usual corruption that comes when people convince themselves they're above the rules. And Marcus Reyes. An unfortunate necessity. He was too close to understanding how deep our influence ran. Eliminating him was distasteful, but the alternative was worse. Exposure would have destroyed not just the Brotherhood, but the careers of hundreds of operators who had no idea they were benefiting from our protection. You murdered a 24-year-old man to protect your organization. I authorized the removal of a threat to national security. The phrasing depends on perspective. Holloway stepped forward, his voice cracking. "James, this is insane. You're talking about murder like it's a budget decision. Marcus had a wife, he had a life, he trusted us. He trusted a system that was already corrupt before he was born. His death didn't change that. It simply maintained the status quo. The status quo that gets operators killed in training because your people falsify records and cut corners." Morrison's expression hardened. "Those failures are acceptable losses. The alternative, outside oversight, civilian interference politicians making decisions about operational readiness, would cost far more lives in the long run." Kira had been listening while simultaneously calculating. 3 armed men, confined corridor. Holloway behind her liability in any tactical engagement. The math was bad, but not impossible. What happens now? She asked. That depends on you. We can end this cleanly. You disappear. Holloway disappears. The investigation at Virginia Beach reaches conclusions that don't threaten essential operations. Life continues. And if I refuse, then you disappear anyway, just more painfully. And everyone who helped you, Senior Chief Webb, Petty Officer Chen, the operators who started asking questions because of your influence, they face consequences as well. The threat landed exactly as Morrison intended. Webb and Chen were innocent. They had cooperated with her investigation because they believed in accountability in doing the right thing. If she got them killed because of choices she made, now their blood would be on her hands. You're asking me to cover up murder. I'm asking you to make a practical decision. The Brotherhood has been operating for 3 decades. We've survived internal investigations, congressional inquiries, changes in administration. We'll survive this too. The only variable is how many people get hurt in the process. Kira's mind raced through options. She could try to take down the 2 guards and reach Morrison before he could respond. But suppressed pistols at this range were nearly impossible to dodge, and Holloway would almost certainly be killed in the crossfire. She could try to negotiate, buy time, look for better opportunities. But Morrison was experienced enough to recognize stalling tactics, or she could do something neither Morrison nor anyone else would expect. There's a third option, she said quietly. I'm listening. You let us walk out of here. I take the evidence we came for, and in exchange I give you something worth more than our silence. Morrison's eyes narrowed. What could you possibly offer that would outweigh the risk of exposure? The name of the person who's been feeding information about Brotherhood operations to the Senate Intelligence Committee for the past 18 months. The words hit Morrison like a physical blow. His carefully maintained composure cracked for just a moment, revealing something beneath fear, maybe, or calculation running at speeds his face couldn't mask. You're bluffing. You've had 3 security incidents in the past year. Operations compromised, personnel reassigned, investigations that got uncomfortably close before being contained. You assumed those were isolated failures. They weren't. Someone inside your organization has been systematically feeding intelligence to people with the authority to destroy you. She was bluffing. She had no idea if there was an informant inside the Brotherhood, or if such a person would be valuable enough to trade for their lives. But Morrison's reaction told her the bluff had landed on fertile ground. There had been security incidents. There was paranoia within the organization about potential leaks. She had given him a reason to keep her alive long enough to verify her claim. Who? Morrison demanded. I'm not stupid enough to tell you while your men have guns pointed at me. We make an exchange. The evidence for the name. Then we go our separate ways. And I'm supposed to trust that you won't take the evidence public anyway. You're supposed to understand that I'm a professional. I was sent to document training failures, not to dismantle shadow organizations. If the Brotherhood wants to continue operating, that's above my pay grade. But I won't be party to murder, and I won't let innocent operators be killed because your security is compromised. Morrison studied her for a long moment. The calculation was visible in his eyes. Risk assessment, probability analysis, the weighing of competing priorities that defined leadership at his level. Finally, he nodded to his men. Stand down. The guards lowered their weapons, though they didn't holster them. A compromise that kept options open for both sides. The evidence, Morrison said. Then we talk about this informant. Kira turned to Holloway. Open the unit. His hands were shaking badly as he approached the biometric scanner. The device beeped, registering his fingerprint and retinal pattern, and the door slid open. Inside was a small room lined with safety deposit boxes of various sizes. Holloway moved to one in the upper right corner, entered a combination, and withdrew a thick manila envelope. Maintenance logs, he said. The real ones. Along with communication records, authorization codes, Everything that proves Marcus Reyes was murdered. He handed the envelope to Kira. She could feel the weight of it in her hands. Months of investigation, dozens of deaths, the systematic corruption of institutions she had dedicated her life to serving, all of it documented in the papers she now held. The name, Morrison said. Kira met his eyes. Admiral Catherine Cross. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Morrison's face went white. One of the guards actually stepped backward, as if the name itself was dangerous. That's impossible. Cross is one of the founding members. She built half of our current infrastructure, which is exactly why she's the perfect person to tear it down. She's been feeding information since her daughter was killed in a training accident 3 years ago. An accident that followed the same pattern as the Reyes incident. An accident that was never properly investigated because the Brotherhood contained it. Kira had no idea if any of this was true. She was constructing a narrative from fragments Morrison's reaction to the bluff, the pattern of cover-ups. She had documented the psychology of betrayal within hierarchical organizations. But it felt true. And Morrison's expression suggested it might actually be true. "We need to verify this," he said, his voice strained. "Then verify it. I'll be gone by the time you figure out whether I'm telling the truth or whether I've just made you paranoid enough to destroy yourselves from within." She turned and walked toward the elevator hallway close behind. Her back was exposed, vulnerable. Every step was a calculation that Morrison wouldn't decide the risk was too great, that the guards wouldn't receive a silent order to fire. 10 steps. 20 steps. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. The doors closed. Kira's legs nearly buckled. The adrenaline that had been sustaining her was draining away, leaving exhaustion and the trembling aftershock of sustained terror. "Was any of that true?" Holloway whispered. "The informant. Admiral Cross. I have no idea." "Then why? Because it gave him a reason to let us live, and because it might be true. Organizations like the Brotherhood breed their own destruction. Someone always eventually decides the mission isn't worth the cost." The elevator reached the ground floor. They walked past the security desk, past the entrance, past the parking lot. Their stolen car was still there, untouched. Kira got behind the wheel this time. Her hands were steady again, the training taking over, pushing emotion down beneath operational focus. "Washington," she said. "We need to reach Blackwell before Morrison figures out I was lying. And if he figures it out before we get there, then we're dead. But at least we tried." The car pulled onto the road headlights, cutting through the gathering darkness. Behind them, the security facility receded into the distance. Ahead, the highway stretched toward a city where the truth might finally find purchase. But Kira knew this wasn't over. Morrison was already on his phone. The Brotherhood was already mobilizing. They had a head start, but it wasn't much of one. And somewhere in the military infrastructure she had served her entire adult life, people were deciding whether she lived or died. The drive to Washington took 4 hours. Kira pushed the speed limit, calculating that the risk of police stops was lower than the risk of Brotherhood pursuit catching up. Holloway sat in the passenger seat, clutching the envelope of evidence like it might dissolve if he let go. Neither of them spoke much. There wasn't much to say. At a gas station outside Fredericksburg, Kira used the burner phone to call the number Holloway had given her for Sarah Blackwell. The journalist answered on the second ring. "This is Blackwell. I have documentation proving a criminal conspiracy within naval special warfare, murder cover-ups, falsified records, systematic corruption at the highest levels." A pause. "Who is this? Someone who needs to go public before the people I'm exposing manage to kill me. How quickly can you meet? Where are you? An hour from DC. Maybe less." Another pause, longer this time. "There's a parking garage on K Street, 3rd level northwest corner. Be there in 90 minutes. Come alone or with one other person maximum. If I see anything that looks like a setup, I disappear, and this conversation never happened." "Understood." The line went dead. Kira returned to the car. "She'll meet us," she told Holloway. 90 minutes. And then what? Then we hand over everything. The evidence, the names, the whole story. And we hope it's enough to bring them down before they bring us down. What about Webb Chen? The people at Virginia Beach who cooperated with your investigation? Kira had been thinking about that. The Brotherhood's threat against them wasn't idle. If she went public, they would be exposed to retaliation. If she stayed silent, they would be exposed to a system that would eventually demand their silence too. There was no clean option. There was only the choice between different kinds of harm. "I'll reach out to them, warn them, give them time to protect themselves." She met Holloway's eyes. "It's not enough, but it's all I can do." "They'll hate you for it, putting them in danger without their consent." "Probably, but they'll be alive to hate me. That's more than Marcus Reyes got." The car pulled back onto the highway. Washington's lights appeared on the horizon, growing brighter as the miles disappeared. Kira thought about everything that had led to this moment. The training at 19 that had shaped her into a weapon. The missions that had taught her the difference between official narratives and ugly truths. The investigation at Virginia Beach that had started as documentation and evolved into exposure. She hadn't planned any of this, hadn't set out to take down a shadow organization or become a fugitive from the institutions she had served. But she had made a choice to pursue the truth instead of accepting convenient lies, to hold systems accountable instead of letting them hide behind classification stamps and bureaucratic process. Now she would live or die by that choice. The parking garage was nearly empty at this hour. Kira pulled into a space on the 3rd level and killed the engine. The northwest corner was visible from their position, a section of empty concrete illuminated by harsh overhead lights. "Wait here," she told Holloway. "What if something goes wrong? Then take the evidence and run. Find another journalist, another outlet. Get the truth out any way you can." She stepped out of the car and walked toward the meeting point. A woman emerged from the shadows near a support pillar. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, dressed in clothes that suggested comfort with both professional environments and situations that required quick movement. "You're the one who called." "I am." "What's your name?" "Kira Thorne, Tier 1 Operator, Joint Special Operations Command." Blackwell's eyebrows rose. "That's a significant claim." "I can prove it, along with everything else." She held out the envelope. Blackwell took it, opened it, scanned the first few pages. Her expression shifted from skepticism to intensity to something that looked like controlled excitement. "This is real." "All of it. Murder cover-ups, falsified training records, a network called the Brotherhood that's been controlling naval special warfare for 3 decades. Why bring it to me? Why not internal channels?" "The internal channels are compromised. Captain Morrison, my contact at SOCOM, is one of the senior leaders. Any report I file goes directly to people who want me dead." Blackwell studied her for a long moment. "You know what happens if we publish this. Your career is over. You'll face prosecution for disclosing classified information. You might go to prison." "I know. Why do it anyway?" Kira thought about Marcus Reyes, 24 years old, 8 months married, dead because people had decided their power was more important than his life. She thought about the operators who would die next if nothing changed, the families who would receive folded flags and condolences that were really just elaborate lies. She thought about the woman she had been when she started this investigation, and the woman she had become in the days since. Because someone has to. Because the people responsible need to face consequences. Because the system only works when people are willing to hold it accountable, even when the cost is everything. Blackwell nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. The story broke at 6 in the morning. Kira watched it happen from a safe house that Blackwell had arranged a small apartment in Alexandria, where the journalists' network maintained resources for exactly this kind of situation. The television was tuned to 3 different news channels simultaneously, each one running the same headline, with slight variations. Shadow organization exposed within naval special warfare. Multiple murders covered up. Senior officers implicated. Holloway sat on the couch with his head in his hands. He hadn't slept. Neither had Kira. The past 48 hours had been a blur of interviews, document verification, legal consultations, and the grinding work of preparing a story that would reshape public understanding of military institutions. "It's really happening," he said quietly. "It's happening. They're going to come for us. Morrison, the others. They won't just let this go. They can't stop it now. The story is out. The documents are public. Even if we disappeared tonight, the damage is done." Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. 7 arrests so far. More coming. You did it. Webb. She stared at the message for a long moment. Webb had survived. The Brotherhood's reach had been cut off before they could retaliate against the people who had cooperated with her investigation. A small victory, but real. Blackwell arrived an hour later with coffee and updates. 14 arrests confirmed. Morrison is in custody. 3 other senior officers named in your documentation have been detained pending investigation. She set down her bag and pulled out a tablet. The Senate Armed Services Committee has announced emergency hearings. The Secretary of Defense is calling for a complete review of special operations oversight. And Admiral Cross? Kira asked. Blackwell's expression shifted to something complicated. That's where it gets interesting. Cross came forward this morning, voluntarily. She's offering testimony in exchange for immunity. She was actually the informant. Apparently so. Your bluff wasn't entirely a bluff. She's been feeding information to congressional investigators for 18 months, just like you told Morrison. Blackwell shook her head slowly. How did you know? I didn't. I guessed based on patterns. The Brotherhood's paranoia about leaks, the timing of their security incidents, the psychology of organizations that operate through fear. Kira paused. Sometimes you get lucky. Lucky is one word for it. The day unfolded in a cascade of revelations and reactions. The families of operators who had died in suspicious training accidents were contacted by investigators. Marcus Reyes's widow appeared on television, her face streaked with tears, her voice breaking as she described finally learning the truth about her husband's death. They told me it was an accident, she said. They gave me a flag and a letter, and they looked me in the eyes, and they lied. For 8 months I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for not knowing something was wrong. Now I find out that people murdered him and then shook my hand at his funeral. Kira watched the interview with something tightening in her chest. This was why she had done it. Not for recognition or justice in some abstract sense, but for this woman. For the truth she deserved. For the closure that could finally begin now that the lies had been stripped away. Holloway stood and walked to the window. I should turn myself in, he said. The immunity offers are going to dry up soon. If I wait too long, they'll treat me like the rest of them. You could run. Disappear. The story is already out. Your testimony isn't essential anymore. No. He turned to face her. I spent 8 months knowing what happened to Marcus Reyes and staying silent. I protected people who committed murder because I was afraid of what would happen to me if I spoke up. Running would just be another form of cowardice. They'll charge you. Accessory after the fact, obstruction of justice. You could face years in prison. I know. His voice was steady now, steadier than she had heard it since the range at Virginia Beach. But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. At least I'll know I finally did the right thing, even if it took too long to get there. He walked toward the door. Holloway. He stopped. For what it's worth, you made a difference. Your willingness to come forward to provide the evidence to take the risk. None of this happens without that. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it's still something. He nodded once, then left. Kira would later learn that Derek Holloway turned himself in to federal authorities that afternoon. He provided extensive testimony about Brotherhood operations, named additional members who hadn't been identified in the initial investigation, and accepted full responsibility for his role in covering up Marcus Reyes's death. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison, reduced from a potential 15 because of his cooperation. At his sentencing hearing, he made a statement that was widely reported. I spent my career believing that loyalty to institutions was more important than loyalty to truth. I was wrong. The institutions I served were built on lies, and my loyalty helped those lies survive. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure it never happens again. The weeks that followed brought changes that Kira observed mostly from a distance. She had been placed on administrative leave pending review of her actions. The disclosures she had made, while ultimately serving the public interest, had still involved classified information. The legal and bureaucratic machinery would take months to determine whether she faced prosecution or commendation. In the meantime, she watched as the reforms she had fought for began to take shape. Naval Special Warfare implemented new oversight protocols. Training facilities across the community were subjected to independent audits. The qualification systems she had criticized were completely redesigned to emphasize substance over appearance. Senior Chief Webb was promoted to command the Virginia Beach facility on a permanent basis. His first action was to implement every recommendation from Kira's original report, the one that had started everything before she knew about the Brotherhood or the murders, or the conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of naval special warfare. Petty Officer Chen was selected for advanced instructor training. In his application essay, he wrote about a contractor who had spent 4 days at his facility and changed the way he thought about standards and accountability. He didn't use Kira's name. He didn't need to. 3 months after the story broke, Kira received a letter. It was handwritten unusual in an era of digital communication. The return address was a suburb of San Diego. Dear Operative Thorne, my name is Elena Reyes. My husband Marcus was killed 8 months ago at the Virginia Beach training facility. Until recently, I believed his death was an accident. Because of what you did, I now know the truth. I want you to understand what that means to me. For 8 months, I carried guilt I didn't deserve. I questioned every decision Marcus and I had made together. I wondered if I had somehow failed to notice warning signs that could have saved his life. Learning that he was murdered, that he was killed because he was brave enough to ask questions and demand accountability doesn't make the grief easier. But it transforms it into something different, something I can carry forward instead of something that drags me backward. My husband died, trying to do the right thing. Now the people responsible are facing consequences. His death wasn't meaningless. It exposed corruption that might have claimed many more lives if it had continued unchecked. I don't know what happens to you next. I've read that you might face prosecution for how you disclosed the information. I've read that some people consider you a hero and others consider you a traitor. I just wanted you to know that I consider you someone who gave me back my husband's memory. Someone who made sure his sacrifice wasn't buried under lies. Thank you. Elena Reyes. Kira read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the box where she kept the few possessions that mattered enough to preserve across the transient life she had lived since joining Special Operations. Some things couldn't be measured in tactical outcomes or mission success rates. Some victories existed only in the hearts of people who would never appear in official reports. The legal review concluded 4 months after the story broke. Kira sat in a conference room at the Pentagon facing a panel of senior officers and civilian officials who would determine her future. The charges against her were serious, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, violation of operational security protocols, conduct unbecoming of a military officer. But the context was complicated. Her disclosures had exposed criminal activity at the highest levels of naval special warfare, had prevented additional deaths, had forced reforms that were already saving lives in training facilities across the community. The hearing lasted 6 hours. Testimonials were presented from officers she had worked with, from Webb and Chen, who described her professionalism and commitment to genuine accountability, from investigators who confirmed that her documentation had been accurate and that the Brotherhood's activities would have continued indefinitely without her intervention. Admiral Catherine Cross, the informant whose existence Kira had guessed at during her confrontation with Morrison, appeared via video link. "Operative Thorne did what I couldn't," Cross said. "I had been feeding information to congressional investigators for 18 months, but the Brotherhood was too embedded, too protected. They could contain leaks and suppress investigations. It took someone willing to go public, willing to sacrifice their own career and freedom to finally break their control." "And you believe her actions were justified?" the panel chair asked. "I believe they were necessary. Sometimes the system is too broken to fix from within. Sometimes you have to step outside the rules to save what the rules were meant to protect." The panel deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with their decision, Kira stood to receive it with the same stillness she had maintained throughout the hearing. "Operative Thorne, this panel has considered all evidence and testimony presented regarding your actions in connection with the Brotherhood investigation. We find that while your methods violated established protocols for handling classified information, the outcome of those methods served a compelling public interest and prevented ongoing criminal activity within military institutions." The chair paused. "Accordingly, we are recommending that all charges against you be dismissed. However, given the unprecedented nature of your disclosures, we are also recommending that you be reassigned from operational status to a training and oversight role within Joint Special Operations Command." Kira absorbed the words. Not exonerated exactly, not returned to the life she had built, but not imprisoned either, not destroyed. A compromise that acknowledged both what she had done and what she had sacrificed to do it. "Do you accept this resolution, Operative Thorne?" She thought about the past months, the investigation at Virginia Beach, the confrontation with Holloway, the chase, the exposure, the slow grinding work of accountability. She thought about Marcus Reyes and the letter from his widow. She thought about the operators who would live because training standards had been raised, because oversight had been strengthened, because someone had forced a system to confront its failures. "I accept." But 6 months later, Kira stood before a classroom of new recruits at the JASOC training facility in Fort Bragg. 23 faces looked up at her young men and women at the beginning of their special operations careers, not yet shaped by the experiences that would define who they became. "My name is Kira Thorne," she said. "Some of you may recognize that name from the news. Some of you may have opinions about what I did and why I did it. I'm not here to convince you of anything." She paused, letting the silence settle. "I'm here to teach you what I've learned in 8 years of operations and investigations. About standards that matter. About accountability that works. About the difference between looking good and being good." She walked slowly along the front of the room. "The military is full of people who will tell you that loyalty means staying silent when you see problems, that raising concerns makes you a troublemaker, that the institution is more important than the individuals it's supposed to serve." She stopped and faced them directly. "That's a lie. Loyalty to broken systems isn't loyalty, it's cowardice. Real loyalty means caring enough about the mission and the people around you to speak up when something is wrong, even when speaking up is harder than staying silent." One of the recruits raised a hand. Young Ernest, the kind of face that still believed everything worked the way it was supposed to. "Ma'am, how do you know when something is worth speaking up about? How do you know the difference between normal problems and problems that require extreme measures?" Kira considered the question. "You don't always. Sometimes you have to act on incomplete information and accept that you might be wrong. But there are some things that are always worth speaking up about. When people are dying because of negligence, when systems are prioritizing appearance over substance, when the people in charge care more about their reputations than about the lives they're responsible for." She thought about Holloway, about Morrison, about the operators who had stood silent on that range while their commander tried to intimidate her. And sometimes the most important thing isn't whether you speak up, but whether you're willing to accept the consequences of speaking up. That's the real test. Not whether you can identify problems, anyone can do that, but whether you're willing to put your career, your reputation, maybe your freedom on the line to address them. The recruit nodded slowly, processing. Another hand went up. "Did you know? When you started the investigation at Virginia Beach, did you know it would lead to everything that happened?" "No. I was sent to document training failures. I had no idea about the Brotherhood or the murders or any of it." Kira allowed herself a small, rueful smile. "Sometimes you start pulling on a thread and the whole fabric comes apart. You can't always predict where the truth will lead you. You just have to be willing to follow it wherever it goes." After the class ended, Kira walked across the base toward the administrative building where her new office waited. The facility was bustling with activity operators, training instructors, evaluating the machinery of military preparation, grinding forward as it had for decades. But underneath the familiar rhythms, something had changed. The reforms she had fought for were being implemented across the community. Training standards had been raised. Oversight had been strengthened. The culture of silence that had allowed the Brotherhood to thrive was slowly being replaced by something healthier, not perfect, but better. It wasn't the career she had planned. Wasn't the life she had imagined when she was 19 years old, setting records at sniper school and dreaming of the operations she would run. But it was meaningful. She was training the next generation of operators to be better than the generation before. Teaching them that standards mattered, that accountability mattered, that the mission was more important than any individual ego or institutional reputation. That was a different kind of mission. Harder to measure. Less dramatic than the operations she used to run, but just as essential. Her phone buzzed with a message from Webb. "New class graduated today. All meeting enhanced standards. None washed out for the wrong reasons. Thought you'd want to know." She read it twice, then typed a reply. "Keep pushing them. The standards only work if people maintain them." His response came immediately. "Understood. We won't let you down." Kira pocketed her phone and continued walking. The afternoon sun was warm on her face. The base stretched around her full of people doing difficult work in service of something larger than themselves. Somewhere in the system, problems still existed. Corners were still being cut. Standards were still being eroded by the eternal pressure to do more with less, to sacrifice quality for speed, to prioritize appearance over substance. That would never fully change. Human nature was what it was. But there were also people fighting back. Webb at Virginia Beach implementing reforms. Chen, now an instructor himself, teaching the lessons he had learned. Elena Reyes speaking publicly about accountability and truth and the importance of never accepting convenient lies. And Kira herself standing in classrooms and conference rooms, training the next generation to be better than the one before. The work continued. It always would. Because real strength didn't announce itself. It simply showed up day after day doing what needed to be done. And sometimes when you held the line long enough, when you refused to accept good enough as sufficient, when you cared more about truth than about comfort, sometimes you actually made a difference. Not a perfect difference. Not a complete transformation of everything that was broken. But something real, something that mattered, something worth the cost. Kira Thorne was 26 years old now. She had exposed a conspiracy, ended careers, saved lives, and lost the operational future she had trained for. She had held the line. And she was just getting started. If you've ever stood up for what's right when staying silent would have been easier, this story was for you. If you've ever been underestimated and proved them wrong, this story was for you. And if you believe that real strength doesn't need to announce itself, that it speaks through actions, through integrity, through the willingness to hold the line when nobody else will, then please subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because the people who make the biggest difference are often the ones nobody saw coming.